If you trust your staff, it doesn't matter where they work from, as long as they get the work done. And I think those companies that are forcing people back into the workforce 5 days a week are potentially going to struggle in the years to come. The only people that are going to remember all the extra hours that you did at work are your children. Your boss ain't going to remember, let's be brutally honest here. But your children, they're going to remember that you weren't there at those dinner times. They're going to remember that you weren't there to spend time with them. Our children now live in two very, very separate worlds. They live in their physical world and they live in their digital world. And that's probably a world that many of us don't really understand. The way parents want to deal with those consequences is to sanction really heavy, detach children from that digital world they live in, which is a catastrophic error. I think being a parent is having that commitment to constantly want to learn, make decisions that you feel are right for you, but most importantly, ask for help if you need it. I think people feel that ADHD is something that I and others diagnosed use as an excuse to justify poor behavior, poor choices. But I want them to see that it's not because dad doesn't care. It's because dad has a condition that makes it a bit more difficult for him to be involved in certain aspects of your life.
Hey, welcome to the Leaders Podcast with me, Laura McDonald, the leadership coach and mentor. Come with me as I explore the elements of leadership that give leaders like you the power and confidence to make the impact you know you can. I'll be sharing my own experiences, top tips and insights, and talking to some very special guests to share their thoughts and leadership experiences on mindset, influence, change, and growth. So let's get right to it. I am very pleased to welcome today Amit Singh Kalley, coach for working parents, storyteller, speaker, and founder of For Working Parents. Welcome to the Leaders Podcast, Amit.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Before we get into your story, I'm going to ask you the question that I ask all my guests, because if you want to serve your others well, you have to serve yourself, right? So what have you done to serve yourself in the last 24 hours?
Oh, gosh. Wow. What a question. Well, yesterday I actually took the evening off from emails and from work. We've just had a baby, so things have been a bit all over the place at the moment. So I just needed some time to myself. So yesterday evening I logged off quite early and just did some me time. Watched MasterChef: The Professionals, watched Asia by David Attenborough, and just enjoyed some time to myself, actually.
I love that. Just being able to take some time off and watch the programs you want to watch rather than what everybody else wants to watch makes a huge difference, doesn't it? There's so much to your story, and we'll delve into as much of that as we can today. But let's start with what got you here. So you're now a storyteller, ADHD advocate, parent coach, and speaker, and you're also a father of 3, the last of which was born a matter of weeks ago. How did you get to this place in your life?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of it was by accident, actually. I used to work in education, so I spent 10 years working in education, was a deputy head teacher in a secondary school, and then I think there were a number of factors that kind of, changed my sort of way of thinking. COVID being one of them, actually, probably one of the main ones. And it made me realize that the world of work is changing. The way in which we sort of work is changing. And I wanted to change with that. And I think working in education, it's not as flexible as perhaps other jobs were. I'd sort of had a career path mapped out for myself, and then just decided almost overnight, actually, just sent my resignation into my head teacher and just said I'm handing in my notice, and then left with no plan. Didn't have any idea what I wanted to do. Spent a year kind of doing a few odd bits of kind of consultancy and a few other sort of bits, retrained as a coach, and then set up this business for working parents. I just thought, I've built up all this experience working with parents, working with young people, that it would be a shame to let it all go to waste. And just because I wasn't able to support young people in the way that I was before, there's no reason why I'm not able to support parents. And then sort of gradually set up for working parents and started doing some coaching of 21st century parents, and started doing some speaking around kind of parental inclusion in the workplace and why parents and carers need a hell of a lot more support than perhaps they're currently getting.
When we first spoke about the idea of doing this podcast, you mentioned that your experience had shown you just how much support parents really need in the workplace. You say that investing in your working parents means investing in your workforce. Can you just explain that statement and why it's important for employers to hear it?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's some recent surveys and studies that have suggested that recruitment of new staff can cost almost £30,000 per staff member when you take into account recruitment fees, agency fees, training fees, staff absence from people that have left, supply kind of staff coming in. All of those things can add up to a huge amount. Whereas if you spend a bit more money, and in addition to that, 1 in 4 parents are considering leaving the workforce because of a lack of flexibility and lack of kind of ability to balance their work and home life. And I think if you're able to provide a workplace that is much more inclusive for parents, that gives them the flexibility they need, that gives them the kind of wider holistic support that they need, you're going to end up attracting and retaining much more talent. Very good talent, which means you haven't got to spend all that money on recruitment. You haven't got to spend all that money on retraining new staff on a kind of revolving door basis. And you're able to get a more harmonious and, as a result of that, a more productive workforce. So for me, it's a no-brainer. And more companies are buying into that. They're understanding that. They're seeing the impact that the work of people like me has, and they're investing more in their staff.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned like COVID obviously changed your perspective quite a lot. I think it changed a lot of people's, didn't it? Personally, I feel like the workforce was already undergoing a huge change, but COVID kind of forced it forward 10 steps because we had no choice but to do it that way. Um, but it's not surprising to me now that I see so many solopreneurs out there because they just said, whatever I need, especially the parents out there, said, whatever I need can't actually be provided by the workplace. Even if it's being provided now, I can't guarantee that it'll still be there in 2 or 3 years, which a lot of people are now finding out is the case. So it wasn't the reason that I became self-employed. I wasn't a parent at the time, but it was certainly a benefit for me to become a solopreneur simply for the fact that I could choose when I worked. I could choose what I did, and when we had our son, it was then a case of, well, I can be here when I want to be. I make the flexibility what I need it to be and work around him and my wife and do what I need to do to make sure I've got time for me too. But so many people obviously stayed in employment roles, and that made things a little bit more difficult because obviously all of a sudden they had all this flexibility afforded to them. And then now slowly we're starting to see some companies try to force them back to the office with that limited flexibility again. I'm interested to know what you think has caused this kind of need to pull everybody back to the office, especially where the evidence suggests that they're being more productive at home.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is actually ideological on the basis that you get certain leaders and managers who feel that if people are not in the workplace, we're not able to monitor what they're doing and monitor their workload. And, part of that comes down to trust. If you trust your staff, it doesn't matter where they work from, as long as they get the work done. But I think a lot of people ideologically think that employees are much more productive in the workplace. And I think a big factor of that is that managers just want to have that kind of oversight of exactly what their employees are doing, and they want to have that kind of regular kind of contact with them. And I appreciate in some work in some industries that's necessary. Do I think people need to be in the workplace 5 days a week? No, absolutely not. And I think those companies that are forcing people back into the workforce 5 days a week are potentially going to struggle in the years to come as the kind of next generation of employees feel that work should be more flexible, and actually we should be allowed to live our lives in the way that we want to live them while still earning good money, and promotion prospects shouldn't be limited by the fact that I'd rather work 3 days from home and 2 days in the office. And I think that some of the larger organizations are perhaps going to struggle a little bit with that in the coming years, because a lot of us that sort of, well, all of us adults that went through COVID recognized if there's one positive that came out of COVID, there wasn't much positive out of it at all. If there's one positive that came out of COVID, it's that a lot of us have redressed that balance between work and home. I think pre-COVID, if our boss told us at 7 p.m. in the evening that we had to get something done for the next morning, we would drop everything. We would drop our children, we would drop our family commitments, and we would get that work done, because we didn't know any different. I think now we're much more precious about our time outside of work, and excellent leaders and managers are much more understanding of their employees' time outside of work. We don't live for work. We live for our relationships. We live for our life. We live for our children. We live for our families and friends. Of course, we need to work. Of course, we need to earn a living. And of course, we need to be good at what we do, and we need to be committed to the job that we have. But there's no reason why that job can't be flexible and compassionate and empathetic and understanding. And like you say, research, although it's quite new, because we're still only a couple of years out of COVID, but research is showing that people can be far more productive working in their own environment without you as my boss checking at 10 o'clock if I'm going for a walk. You know, if I'm going for a walk at 10 o'clock, so what? As long as I get the work done, what does it matter?
I do kind of attach to that a statement that was made in a previous episode um, with Joanna Rawbone. She said it's important for employers to recognize that thinking is work.
That's a good point. Yeah, absolutely. If I'm going out for a walk, I might be thinking about work whilst I'm trying to clear my head and maybe enjoy a little bit of the dry weather that we've got. And I think it just comes down to trust. I mean, look, if you're employing staff, you've got to be able to trust that they get the work done and trust that they can do it from wherever they want to do it from. Of course, if they're not getting the work done, if they're taking advantage, if the work from home thing isn't working, I get all of that. You have the parameters in place to put measures in place to monitor their performance. But I see so many founders who employ people and so many organizations, established organizations that employ people that have such outstanding and amazing work cultures that actually attract people who want to work in those cultures. You know, a healthy workplace culture isn't having a table tennis table in the office, or it's not having bring your dog to work day, or it's not having beers every Thursday afternoon, because that's not what everybody wants. Sometimes what employees want is just to be able to be in the comfort of their own environment where they're happy. That is true flexibility. That is true inclusion. And as long as I get the work done, what does it matter to you if I'm sitting on my sofa watching something in the background? As long as that work is being done and it's being done to the best of my ability, and you as my boss are happy with the quality of that work, why should it matter where I'm doing it from?
Absolutely. And there's so many of my clients over the years that have struggled with that switch off at the end of the day. For whatever reason, they've ended up working till silly o'clock. I remember one particular client was working an additional 4 to 6 hours a day. And we had a serious conversation about the impact that that was having. And she said the primary effect was on her and her kids. And to be honest, she was probably one of the most astounding changes that I've seen. She said literally overnight, I stopped doing it. Literally overnight, I stopped doing all those extra hours. I realized that I only needed to do the hours that I was actually paid for. And more importantly, that nobody, even if there was some sort of background pressure that had been hinted at, nobody had ever directly asked me to do all those extra hours. She took all those hours away. And the first thing she said when I asked her, she said, "My kids have got their mum back." And that, to me, was the most important thing that she could have got out of this, was realizing that she wants to be there for her kids, and actually that's completely within her control.
Absolutely, and there's that famous sort of phrase. I can't remember the exact wording, but you know, the only people that are going to remember all the extra hours that you did at work are your children. Your boss ain't going to remember. Let's be brutally honest here. You know, your boss is not going to remember that you stayed up until 11 o'clock slogging, because everybody's replaceable. None of us are indispensable in the workplace, no matter how good we might be. But your children, they're going to remember that you weren't there at those dinner times. They're going to remember that you weren't there to spend time with them because you were attached to your laptop. So you know, it's really about finding that balance that ensures that you are committed to your work and you are aspirational and you want all those promotions. All of that's great, and nobody should take away the fact that we should be aspirational and we should celebrate aspiration. But at the same time, we need to create an environment where actually, you know what, being a parent or a carer, or if you're not a parent, being there for yourself or for those that you care about is, I would say, not equally important to work, more important than work. You're going to show up better at work if you're happier at home. It's really as simple as that.
I completely agree. You know, we're not a separate person at work. We're not, this whole new human being. We're the same human being. And no matter how much we try to separate those things, what goes on at home does affect work, and what goes on at work does affect home.
Yeah,
So we have to realize that work is just one part of our life. And when we treat it as that, that's the point when we can start to find that balance. So,
absolutely
yeah.
agree.
If you had the authority to change one thing for working parents in the workplace right now, what would it be?
Well, I would say, based on the kind of anecdotal feedback that I've received from people that I work with and workplaces that I engage with, I would say parents just crave that flexibility, that ability to be able to have work around family time rather than family time around work. So if that means I've got to go and pick up the kids from school at 3 o'clock, I should be allowed to do that without having to worry, without even having to ask my boss, can I go and pick my kids up? Because half of the battle is having the courage to ask. And a lot of people don't have that courage to ask because they're worried about how they're going to be perceived as, slackers or asking for too much flexibility. And if I'm prepared to put that half an hour in at the end of the day, maybe when the kids are asleep, then let me put it in then. But I think creating that culture where children and family comes first, I think is what I would really love to change in all workplace cultures.
The most important leadership role we play in life is that of parent, right? So I always feel like I always knew that that was the case, but never really understood just how important it was until I became a parent. And we've now got our little boy, he's now 2, which is the weirdest stage so far for me. he it's super exciting because he's got all this personality and language and capability coming through and so much more happening for him. But at the same time, he's challenging everything. He's
Mm.
discovered the power of selective hearing. He's
Mm.
he's pushing boundaries to figure out where they sit, which is all of these things are good things because he's learning as he goes. But it can be hard for the parents because obviously you realize how much you're having to tell them some version of no. You're having to introduce discipline and boundaries that they don't like, and your child is not always happy either, which can be massively uncomfortable because the one thing you want for your kids is for them to be happy. But what's your advice to parents at any stage to just help them show up for their kids in the way that they want to?
Yeah, I mean, most of the work that I do with parents are of kind of teenagers and what we call tween ages, which is that kind of top end of primary school, going up. Because I think at that stage, you've got lots of emotions coming through, manifesting themselves in different ways to sort of toddlers. Because, of course, with that age, you've got puberty, you've got hormones, you've got a new worldview that young people are developing that might be very different to your worldview. And it's really about adapting to those constant changes that your children are going through and being open-minded to those changes, spending time with your children on things that they like doing rather than what you like doing. Because you're going to soon realize that your children have very different interests to you. There might be some shared interests based on what they've grown up with around you, but they might develop some very different interests to you and interests that you don't understand. We live in such a different world. I always say to parents now, it's the hardest time to parent today than it's ever been, I think. Our children now live in two very, very separate worlds. They live in their physical world and they live in their digital world. And that's probably a world that many of us don't really understand as well as our children do. And we have to accept the digital world to our children is as important as their physical world. And we might not understand what it means to worry about games and avatars and even AI and things like that, But some of our children, they might love it. They might relish that. And it's about actively engaging your own brain. I think being a parent is having that commitment to constantly want to learn. It's being open-minded enough to want to constantly learn based on what your child brings home from school, brings home from their friends, and experiences from their kind of digital exploration. It's that willingness and that want to explore this new world with your children, no matter what their age. A 2-year-old, your 2-year-old is going to be exploring a world and bringing things home that you don't know about or maybe even don't care about. You don't care about the pasta shell painting that he did, but to him that's really important. It's about engaging what he's created and why he's created it. And I think it's that willingness to constantly want to engage your brain and learn about the new things your children bring home.
I always say that people almost exactly my age are kind of the most fortunate generation, really, because we were getting mobile phones literally at the moment that things like MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, all this sort of stuff was coming out. We were learning about all this technology as it grew. And the one thing I think is important when it comes to that is engagement, wanting to learn or wanting to be interested in what my son is interested in. But part of that can also be me sharing what I learned. And it's not always easy to identify exactly what it is that you learned because you grew with the technology. You learned as you went. But he's able to learn an awful lot from me to set him up to use it the right way and to use it in the way that's going to benefit him. So even if I don't understand what he wants what he wants out of it, I can still teach him how to get there in the way that's going to work for him and is going to do things like protect his mental health and make sure that he doesn't get addicted to his phone and all this kind of stuff. But there's also so many other benefits that we got from technology, such as gaming. Gaming's been around forever and a day. We see the benefits of that. Our abilities to problem solve and to communicate with other people have been partly developed through gaming. So I have no doubt that at some point my son's going to take that on. If I can then share with him what he's going to get out of it and let him see all the positives of everything he's using, being able to say, actually, there's a lot of positives that you're getting out of this. Can you see them? I think that's really important for me to share as well. It's not just about me learning, it's about him learning from me too.
I mean, as challenging as it is parenting in the 21st century, there's also lots of rewards to reap, I think, from this kind of new technological age that we're in. And I think if we embrace it and engage with it in the right way, of course, there are lots of risks. And a lot of the work that I do with parents is about understanding those risks, because a lot of parents are just unaware of what those risks are. They're not technologically savvy. They don't know too much about the dangers that exist out there, and suddenly it's too late and something really terrible has happened. And often the way parents want to deal with those consequences is to sanction really heavy, come in hard with the consequences and detach children from that digital world they live in, which is a catastrophic error. Because if you're taking their digital world away from them, they're gonna access it from other places. They're gonna start learning to become secretive. They're going to start learning that you are not a safe space for them to talk about their digital world with, and they're going to get their information from elsewhere. They're going to get their support from elsewhere, and it's no longer within your control's a strong word to use, because I don't think we need to control it, but it's no longer within your safety net to be able to keep your children safe from those dangers. You're now exposing them to the world without any training, without any support. You're just saying to them, here's a phone, or I'm taking your phone away because you've done something terrible. But you're going to get a phone from somebody else, or you're going to start logging into your social media from another place, and I'm no longer able to monitor that activity or have those conversations with you. So it's a really challenging time, and it's about navigating it as safely as possible.
And I suppose the one other consideration that we have to think about here is that there's plenty of evidence to suggest that in this country, at least, people are becoming parents later in life. So,
Yes.
where my parents' generation were having all their kids in the sort of early 20s,
Yeah.
we're now looking at generations that are having kids in their early or late 30s.
Mm.
So, is that going to make it harder for this kind of digital understanding gap to actually find a middle ground? Is that going to make it harder for parents simply because they've become an older parent?
It could do, but obviously, yeah, but as times sort of move on, most of us, if we look at sort of millennials, I guess that generation are probably tech savvy enough to be able to get by. Some of us obviously very tech savvy, and some of us not at all. But I think generally speaking, and I'm talking anecdotally again, just based on sort of conversations that I've had over the years, we're probably tech savvy enough to get by. I think the generation above us might be the one that's kind of struggling. People that might be in their sort of 40s and 50s and have kind of teenage children or older children. That might be where the kind of struggle might be. But one of the worst things that I've heard older parents say to me is, I'm too old to understand this technology. And I reject that completely. Because yes, you can take that view. You may well be too old to understand technology, and you can have that view. But if you're not willing to learn about technology, you're allowing your child to discover that world on their own without any support from you. So whatever happens to them, whatever they're exposed to, you have no idea about it. You have no idea how to control it. You have no idea how to keep them safe. And if they ever do come to you, not that they will because you've made it clear you're not interested, but if they ever do come to you with an issue that they're having in their digital world, you're not going to have a clue how to offer them meaningful guidance and support because you haven't bothered to learn about it because you claim that you're too old. You're not too old. You're too lazy, actually. And I know that sounds quite harsh, but you're not too old to learn about technology. Nobody is too old to learn about anything if you put your mind to it. And when it's your children's livelihood and their safety that's at stake, I would urge every single parent, no matter what your age, to be learning about the world that they're living in so that you understand it and so that you can keep them safe in it.
I absolutely agree. I think if my 80-year-old nan can learn to use Facebook, we're fine.
Yeah.
We really are. It's, there's so many older people, especially through the likes of COVID, that actually took on this challenge of learning technology that they'd never seen. And even now, I mean, my nan is just one example of some of the older people in my family that have taken that challenge on. But actually, they've been really successful in it. But they're still learning lessons. They're still growing. They're willing to listen to those that know it better to make sure that, again, they're keeping their own safety net
Yeah.
intact. So, like I said, if the absolute top eldest generations in our world can learn to use all this technology, there is, yeah, I completely agree with you. There is no parent out there that can't learn this. There really
Yeah,
isn't.
absolutely.
What has been your most impactful lesson from parenthood so far?
I would say it's you know understanding and realizing the huge responsibility that I have to help my children navigate this difficult world that we live in. They are so reliant on me and my wife to keep them safe, to shield them from harm. I mean, that sense of responsibility, I think, is huge. And I think when we had our first daughter and we went through all the health issues that we went through with her, I think that sense of responsibility that we felt was absolutely huge. We look down at this baby. I mean, even my little baby now, I look down at him and think, he is 100% reliant on us. And he is going to be 100% reliant on us for a long time to come. And I think that being able to shoulder that responsibility, I think, comes with huge challenges. And it's why some people genuinely do struggle. And it's not because they're not responsible enough. It's often because, we just don't know how to manage that responsibility. And all of us are learning. I'm learning, goodness me, I'm learning every day. But how to shoulder that responsibility and how to be effective with that responsibility as well. So I think that's probably, and also dividing my time up, making sure I'm spending enough time with them. I'm doing things that interest them that I have absolutely no interest in whatsoever. There's nothing worse than kind of sitting down writing letters or sitting down, like I said earlier, making pastel shell artwork. I couldn't think of anything worse than doing that, especially with my ADHD brain. I find it very challenging. But I also recognize that it's not about me and the importance that that has on my children. That time spent with them is bonding time. It's time to sort of talk about things, and it's showing them that I care about the world they're living in. Because for them, pastel shells are really important right now, and for them, their hair is really important right now, and for them, learning the letter A is really important for them right now. So I've got to sort of invest in that. So yeah, I think that probably comes under that whole element of being responsible for these little human beings, and I'm not sure anyone's ever prepared for that.
No, I would agree. It was a shock. It was definitely a shock to suddenly have this extremely tiny person
Yeah.
sat in front of me going, "Oh my God, I've got to like
Yeah.
at the very least keep him alive." Like that was but like you say, as his personality comes through, as he starts to show me his interests, as he starts to go, "Look, mummy, look what I did," it's kind of you do have to take that genuine interest and realize like how big of a deal that is for him. The fact that he's been able to take that step forward and learn something new or do something successfully 5 times in a row, it's all enormously important to him right now. To him, that's his whole world. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
as I said earlier, and you've just mentioned it, you are an ADHD advocate, and you share your story to raise awareness of this, especially in minority communities. Why does this need to be highlighted, particularly in minority communities?
It's woefully misunderstood in my own community and other minority communities, and it's not seen as anything serious. It's not seen as anything real. There are a lot of people in minority, and this goes beyond minority communities as well. But me being of a minority and thinking about my own community, I think it's not taken seriously. I think people feel that ADHD is something that I and others diagnosed use as an excuse to justify poor behavior, poor choices, poor attitude. And I think part of what I want to do is make it very clear to parents that might have ADHD children, or parents that might be ADHD themselves but don't know it yet, or are unsure about why they behave in certain ways or why they respond to things in certain ways. I want to be an advocate for them. So I want them to be able to see, my goodness, these are things that I do. This is how I respond to something. This guy's got an ADHD diagnosis. Maybe it's something I need to go through. And I want to be able to empower people and provide them that sense of validation that they are absolutely fine. And the way that they are is because they have this condition. And actually, we need to work on ways to manage that condition, whether it's through ADHD coaching, whether it's through therapy, whether it's through medication, whatever the right approach is for you. But I just think it's something that is so poorly understood in minority communities that I want to just sort of do more about raising that awareness.
How does ADHD affect you as a parent?
Oh, it affects me all the time. Obviously, I can go on all day about how it affects me just in my daily life without the parenting side of things. But you probably know all about the kind of symptoms and the impact that it has. But as a parent, for sure, I mean, I just mentioned this idea of having to sit down with my daughter and make pastel paintings with her. I couldn't think of anything worse. I just want to pick up that paper and throw it away because I am bored. I am bored within the first 30 seconds of doing that. And I feel terrible feeling that way. I'm terrible at dinner time, watching her painfully eat at the slowest pace in the world, whatever it is that she's eating. I lose my patience. I get frustrated. I get angry. I just want to pick up the food and sort of shove it down her throat because I just can't be bothered to wait anymore. The idea of doing things that they like comes a real challenge to me because I don't like doing things that I don't like, basically. So that's a real challenge for me. There are so many ways that it impacts me as a parent. But now that I have the diagnosis, and now that other people know that I have the diagnosis, there's a little bit more understanding of perhaps why I behave in the way that I do. Obviously, my children have no idea. But as they get older, I'm going to normalize it completely for them because who knows? They may carry elements of sort of neurodiversity in them, which we'll need to look at later on in life. But I want them to see that it's not because dad doesn't care. It's because dad has a condition that makes it a bit more difficult for him to be involved in certain aspects of your life. And so it shows up every day with me as just as a person, but also as a dad.
Absolutely. And you said when we first spoke about this podcast, you said about how there's lots of support out there at the moment, or it's definitely increasing the amount of support out there for kids with ADHD. But actually, you don't see that much support out there for adults who are being diagnosed with ADHD. What?
No, there isn't. I mean, there's the NHS reckons there's about 3% of adults now that have been diagnosed with ADHD. So this myth that ADHD is being overdiagnosed and this horrible this thing that I hear people say everybody's got a bit of ADHD or I think I'm really ADHD. You may well be. If you are, go and get diagnosed. If you're not, please stop talking about it and please stop saying that you are a bit ADHD because that minimizes the impact that being ADHD has on individuals. So I think it's become incredibly trivialized, and I don't think the crippling impact that being ADHD can have on people that actually have the diagnosis and have to take sort of medication to be able to manage and to cope. And I think in adults, a lot of us are scared about getting diagnosed. I think people are scared of being labeled, which I find again really strange because and some parents, by the way, are scared of having their children labeled. They don't want to have their children assessed for ADHD or anything on the spectrum, whether it's autism or Asperger's, anything that might be on the spectrum. They're scared to have their children labeled. And I did a really great podcast with somebody a little while ago who made a really fantastic point that if you're scared of having your child labeled or indeed yourself labeled with ADHD, you can bet your bottom dollar they're going to be labeled with other things. And those other things are going to be stupid, rude, arrogant, lazy, weird. So would you rather your children and you be labeled with those terms, or would you rather say that actually I'm autistic or I'm ADHD or whatever it might be, and these are the reasons why I might behave in a certain way? And I think if we're not going to be willing to have ourselves or our children diagnosed, then unfortunately we have to be prepared with all those kind of horrible labels that might appear in the school playground or in the workplace.
Oh, I agree. You have to be prepared for the other things that come by you refusing to acknowledge that something could be happening in the background for yourself or your child. If I was to think about all the kind of neurodiverse conditions that are out there, I think ADHD is kind of a little bit of an anomaly because I'm wondering if eventually it's going to come out that this is just kind of like how we have introverts and extroverts in the world. They're both there. They're there all the time. They've always been here. And I suppose that's already true of ADHD. It's always been around. It's just that obviously we're only now at the point of understanding it or recognizing it or being able to diagnose it. But I wonder if it's going to be one of those things that says, actually, this is such a chunk of the population that actually we just have to, especially in settings like education, we have to be able to accommodate both non-neurodiverse and neurodiverse thinking on the basis that it's just normal, in quotes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And this myth around everybody being diagnosed with ADHD is a nonsense. Like I said, The NHS is saying about 3% of adults are currently diagnosed with ADHD. There's probably more out there, a lot more in the community that need to be diagnosed. And with children, it's about 4 or 5%. So, when I was working in education, if we had a school of 1,000 people, we probably had around 60 or 70 kids that were ADHD. So we're talking about a tiny percentage of the entire school. The reason why people think it's overdiagnosed is because those individuals take up a lot more of your time, because the ADHD means that they need extra support or they behave in certain ways that need more of your input. And so people think suddenly that we've got a lot more people with ADHD or whatever it might be. And I liken it, and I want to be very careful not to be flippant here. But when we talk about homosexuality and the fact that we have more gay people in the world today, it's not because there are more gay people. We've always had gay people in the world, right? It's been there since the very beginning. But it's just that we've created a society, certainly in some parts of the world, where people are not afraid anymore to say that they are gay or bisexual or transsexual or whatever it might be. It's not that, and those people that are deeply offended by that and feel that, we've got, too many people coming out as gay, they're just confused. These kids are just confused. They don't know what's going on. They're seeing all these things on social media. Yes, there might be elements of confusion, but people that I've spoken to who are homosexual would say that actually that period of discovery is really confusing for them. And it is a really confusing time. And just because the stats say that we've got more gay people in the UK, for example, it doesn't mean we've got more gay people today than we had in the 1950s. We had probably the same number. We've just got more people that are proud and open about it. So with ADHD, we've always had people with ADHD. It's just that now we're getting more and more people diagnosed with it. And so people are openly talking about it. And that doesn't make it trivial. That doesn't make it overly diagnosed. That doesn't make it, oh, look, here's another person with ADHD talking about how vulnerable they are and how we need to make exceptions for them. It just means that society is progressing. We're moving forward into a more inclusive place for everybody that might be a bit different.
And it's going to be one of those conditions, I think, that will very quickly become understood because the conversation about it at the moment is so loud. Now, obviously, all elements of any kind of disability or diversity or anything like that obviously all need highlighting so that people are educated and can understand stuff and then form their own opinion on it. But with ADHD, the conversation has come so quickly and so loudly. I think although there's still a great deal of misunderstanding, possibly stigmatization around ADHD, like you say, the fear of getting diagnosed for yourself, for your child, you are much more likely to quickly be able to find information about ADHD now, simply because people are aware that there's a conversation out there. And I think that's been a massive benefit. We're nowhere near there yet, to the point that it is just part of everything. We just accommodate.
Yeah, I don't know why people are so offended by accommodating people that are different. I don't know why people are so upset with the idea that we should accommodate people of different race, people of different faith, the LGBTQ plus community, people that are disabled, people that are neurodiverse. What is so offensive to people about allowing people that might be different or allowing people that might think differently to have those views? We live in this society. I mean, we're recording this today on the 5th of November, which is the day of the presidential election in the USA. I'm sure when this goes out, we'll know what those results are. But we're in this society where why are we so offended by people being a little bit different or wanting to express who they are? No one's asking you to agree with it. No one's asking you to say that it's even okay. All we're asking is for you to allow people that are different to be able to express those differences openly and freely. And I think we're biased, I would say it's the best country in the world for some of those things. Are we where we need to be? Absolutely not. Are we on a pathway to that? I think we really are. And we're on a pathway to making people feel more comfortable in the body and the mind that they live in.
One conversation I think is kind of important to have around any kind of diversity is understanding where accommodations really need to be made. So you just brought up a whole list of possible diversities in people, and I sit in the LGBTQ plus community. Other than being legally equal, I don't need anything. Like, my life doesn't affect you in any way. My choices, the people that I love in my life, my family, the way that I grow that family, don't affect you in any way. So all I ask is that I have the same rights as everybody else. So accept me for who I am and move on to
Yeah.
those people where you actually need to pay more attention, like ADHD. You know,
So
give them some voice.
that's a really fair point. And obviously you living that experience, that's obviously your kind of take on it. I appreciate that there might be other people in your community that feel that they do need to be seen and heard. There are people in my kind of skin color community that feel that they do need to be seen and heard. I guess it's just about creating a society where everybody can be treated for who they are as a person. If you show up to work, like you say, it doesn't matter what your home circumstances are, what your life circumstances are, what choices you make in your life, so long as those choices obviously don't impact the world negatively. It doesn't matter really, does it? It's just about you being able to live freely, be who you are, be true to yourself, and showing up in the workplace in that way. Same with me as a person of color, as a person who's neurodiverse. Yeah, so I agree with you completely on that as well.
I would rather the attention was placed where we need to learn, where we need to educate ourselves, where we need to build the right accommodations for people by asking people what they need rather than making the assumption, because this is a big one with ADHD, the assumption that everybody with ADHD looks exactly the same. And they really don't. There's a different set of characteristics, behaviors, thinking patterns for every single person with ADHD. And while some people will share certain traits, they still show up in different ways for people. I would rather the attention was focused there than focused on, as an example, a characteristic like mine, that other than making sure we get to the point that we are legally equal, I don't need any attention. I don't need anything else from society. And yes, I do still need to be seen and heard, and I talk about who I am quite proudly because I'm part of the world. I'm not in a separate little community in the corner. I'm part of the world. I always have been. But I don't need anything extra from anybody. Whereas people with ADHD and other neurodiverse conditions need people to educate themselves, need people to understand, need people to make accommodations, need people to move the workplace, education system, everything else forward so that everybody can learn in the way that's best for them, can grow, develop, reach their aspirations in the way that suits them. And that's the bit that's going to take work.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I mean, it's this we've come a long way, I think, as a society and as a kind of a workforce, but there are still some things that we can do, which is why, some of this kind of anti-DEI kind of labeling people that are inclusive as being woke, whatever that weird word reads, is I think a little bit worrying. Being inclusive and trying to create an environment for all without worrying too much. Like you say, it would be wonderful if we could live in a society where we don't have any of these inclusion groups in the workplace because we won't need them. Right now, we're not there yet, of course, which is why we need those groups to advocate for people of different kind of walks of life. But it would be great for you and I to show up to the same job one day. Nobody cares about your sexuality. Nobody cares about the color of my skin or my neurodiversity. And we just get on and do the job.
I hope one day we see it. I hope it happens in our lifetime. I do.
Yeah, same too.
I think we've moved so forward, so far, so fast. It would be
Yeah.
lovely to see the end result. I know it's unlikely, but but it would be lovely to see the end result. So, as we said, you were diagnosed with ADHD as an adult. How did learning that you had ADHD change you?
I had known that I had ADHD for a long time because working in education, I saw what ADHD was in young people, and I recognized almost all of the kind of things in me, in both what I was like as a child and what I've been like as an adult. I told people, my colleagues and people in my family that I had ADHD. They laughed me off. Don't be so silly. I couldn't sit in meetings. I zoned out all the time. There's been a couple of moments on this call where I just zoned out. I had to just sort of bring myself back in. I'm thinking about other things, and I told people, and they would say to me, "Don't be ridiculous. You're just trying to justify the need to walk out of a meeting. You're just trying to justify your fidgeting. You're just trying to justify your behavior." So getting the diagnosis for me was a really important step because I needed that validation. I needed to feel empowered. I had no doubt that it would come back with a diagnosis. I mean, it came back with me meeting pretty much every single thing on the list, and for me, incredibly empowering. I'm not scared of being labeled. For me, labels are great. I think they're things that I can then advocate for other people who might be a little bit scared of having those labels. So I would say, yeah, two words that come to mind are sort of empowering and validating.
And that's what I think every person hopes for, isn't it? Is that actually it's that really positive and empowering experience rather than, oh gosh, now I've got to deal with this. It is that choice on how you look at it that makes the difference about whether you end up succeeding with it or, like you say, using it as an excuse for whatever it is that's happening for you. But it's, yeah, if you found it empowering, if you found it validating, that's a great experience to have, because then you can go, right, okay, well, I knew that this was going to come back anyway, but just to have the kind of official stamp of, yes, you've got this, just it must have just propelled you forward with confidence and just gone, yeah, you know what, I do know what I'm talking about. Like, I've got this. I can talk to other people about this. I can, as you say, you can advocate for those people
Absolutely.
that potentially feel fearful.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I'm trying to do.
What's your message to all parents out there?
Be true to yourself, be authentic, raise your children in the way that you feel is right. But most importantly, parenting, I think, is an incredibly judgmental industry. We judge each other based on the way our children behave, and we judge each other based on decisions that parents make that we don't agree with. So I think as long as you're raising children that are happy and healthy, make decisions that you feel are right for you. But most importantly, ask for help if you need it. We're also worried about what society thinks of us as parents. We're labeled as failed parents if our child drinks alcohol at 9 years old, or we're failed parents if our child smokes weed at 13 years old, or we're failed if our 4-year-old is throwing tantrums all over the place. There's no such thing. As long as you're trying your best and you're doing your best, children behave in lots of unique and wacky ways. Don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. Let's move away from this stigma. Let's move away from this judgment of people being bad parents. Are there bad parents out there? Yeah, of course they are. Sadly, there are. But the majority of us are not bad parents. We might just be struggling at certain junctures. And it's about asking for help and not worrying about feeling judged.
I think that was the most important piece of advice that we got, was make sure you ask for help. There's going to be plenty of things that you don't know about. Like me as the eldest cousin on one side of the family, obviously the eldest sibling in my little family, I had a lot of experience with kids. I had 8 nieces and nephews before we had my
Well,
son, so I'd had kids around forever. So of course you know how to do the tasks, but it's so much more than tasks. And just being able to say to someone, I've run out of steam, I can't deal with this, how do you deal with it? you
absolutely.
know it just brings back the reality that you're, yeah, that human being at the core of it. And sometimes you have to accept that you can't be the expert, even if you are the person that knows your child best.
Absolutely. And sometimes we're vulnerable and our child springs things on us that we're not prepared for, which is why I went into kind of parent coaching. It's not to judge parents, it's not to label parents as failures. It's to just guide them through any challenges they might be having. It's just to, and that's not because I'm an expert. I'm a coach. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not telling you how to respond to a situation. I'm helping you come up with the strategies and the skills that you need yourself to be able to navigate a particular challenge. And that's why I think working with parents has been really liberating for me. It's been fantastic. And those parents that are willing to ask for that help without being worried about the labels that are attached with that, I think are the ones that are going to thrive and flourish.
You are an incredible support for people in the most crucial role in their life. Your LinkedIn profile was hacked a few weeks ago and you posted about it. And suddenly hundreds of people came out of the woodwork to sing your praises about the work you do and all the support that you've given them in the years that you've been doing this. If somebody out there was listening and wants to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Well, yes, my LinkedIn was hacked, and the hacker deleted a year's worth of posts, which was really upsetting because you put a lot of time into building your brand and who you are and supporting people. But ultimately, I'm back into LinkedIn. Some of the older posts are there. I started reposting there, and you're right, there were some amazing people that I knew and didn't know and don't know, sort of rallying around. So my LinkedIn is at Amit Singh Kalley. You can find lots of information there about what I do. My website is forworkingparents.com. It's just going through a slight rebrand at the moment, but there's information about what I do there, both on a personal level and on a professional level. On Instagram at For Working Parents, on TikTok, believe it or not, at For Working Parents. So lots of different places that you can find me and the work that I do, and you can contact me through any of those places.
Amazing. And I'll put all the links for those in the description to this episode when it comes out. It has been fantastic to talk to you. Your experiences have led you down this path that's now seeing you serve others in a wonderful way. Your insights from this conversation were so valuable, and thank you so much for your openness about it. I hope you've enjoyed your guest experience here.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. It's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you, Laura.
You're most welcome. It's been an insightful and empowering conversation. Thank you so much for being here.
No worries. Cheers.
Until next time, everyone.